The reading this morning will come from 1 Chronicles chapter 29, verses 10 through 13. Therefore David blessed the Lord before all the assembly, and David said, Blessed are you, Lord God of Israel, our Father forever and ever. Yours, O Lord, is the greatness, the power, and the glory, the victory and the majesty, for all that is in heaven and earth is yours. Yours is the kingdom, O Lord, and you are exalted as head over all. Both riches and honor come from you, and you reign over all. In your hand is power and might. In your hand it is to make great and to give strength to all. Now therefore, our God, we thank you and praise your glorious name.
We're going to be in 1 Chronicles chapter 29 this morning. If you want to get your Bibles out and turn there. Such a pleasure to be with you this morning. We have a number of visitors with us. We want you to know you're especially welcomed here. I didn't say that at the beginning. I usually do. I try to say that. But we do find great encouragement in the visitors that join us in worship. And we hope that the things that we do are understandable and, of course, are pleasing to God. That's our main goal. We've been studying about prayers throughout the Bible and just working our way, looking at different prayers, and we're going to continue that again this morning. And this morning, to kind of set up our study, I just want you to kind of think about what makes a good prayer, what makes a valuable prayer for God. Sometimes we might think that having a lot of words makes a good prayer, and we just think that the more we speak, the more we must really know what we're talking about, and the more we must be doing a really good job. Maybe some of us feel that way at times, and we feel like if it's a shorter prayer, then we're not really doing what we should be doing. You know, we're not really giving God what He deserves, the time He deserves, and we might struggle with that. Sometimes we might think that a good prayer is one that sounds very eloquent and beautiful, and there's no mistakes, or there's no stuttering, or there's no pauses, or anything like that. There's no repetitions, maybe. We think repetitions are a bad thing, maybe not. But couldn't we see how a prayer could have any of those elements, whether on this side or that side, and still be a great prayer? That prayer is not necessarily, the greatness of a prayer is not necessarily determined by these certain little things. But that greatness in prayer is about something deeper than that. And that seems much more superficial. The idea of a great prayer is more so about the heart of the person who's praying. And so as we think about prayer and we study prayer, I wanted to look at a person who has a good heart. And if you know David, you know who we're going. You know we're going to David. Man after God's own heart. We just studied about him in the VBS, right? Here's a man who has a great heart that God even calls out as being the one He chooses, not because he's the biggest or the strongest, but because in him I see a man who has a heart that's after my own heart. And so if we're going to study prayer, we have to open up our Bibles to a prayer of David's. The problem is, which one? He has quite a few prayers throughout the Bible. Well, we could just do a series and work through all of them, but I really wanted to look at this one. This is one that maybe is lesser known, maybe is lesser focused on, and yet it is a very powerful prayer that we're going to be studying together. As we study David's prayer, it was just read. Part of it was just read for us by Dwayne. Let's look at that again, verses 10 through 13, and notice what he's praying for. It says in verse 10 of 1 Chronicles 29, Therefore David blessed the Lord in the presence of all the assembly and said, Blessed are you, O Lord, the God of Israel, our Father, forever and ever. Yours, Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the victory and the majesty, for all that is in the heavens and in the earth is yours. Yours is the kingdom, O Lord, and you are exalted as head above all. Both riches and honor come from you, and you rule over all. In your hand are power and might, and in your hand it is to make great and to give strength to all. And now we thank you, our God, and praise your glorious name. What is it that makes a great prayer? Well, David's going to be showing us what it is that makes a great prayer as we study through this prayer. The first thing you see is he's very obviously honoring and exalting God in this prayer. He lifts up God. He recognizes who God is, how powerful God is, how wonderful God is, how God is the one who has given him everything. He has given him the riches. He's given him the honor. He's given him the power, the strength, the might to go out and to accomplish all that he's accomplished. David recognizes that God is the source of all the things that he has and that he can do. And I think that's a powerful element in prayer, is that recognition that you're the one who's given me all these wonderful things in my life. And I think that indicates the heart that's in the right place. But along with that is the humility that he's exhibiting. And you see that develop even more in the next verses. Verse 14, he says, "But who am I, and what is my people, that we should be able thus to offer willingly? For all things come from you, and of your own have we given you. For we are strangers before you and sojourners, as all our fathers were. Our days on the earth are like a shadow, and there is no abiding. O our God, O Lord our God, all this abundance that we have provided for building you a house for your holy name comes from your hand and is all your own. I know, my God." We'll stop there, verse 16. All right. Notice here in the continuation of his prayer that he's got this extreme humility. He says, "Who am I?" Now, you know who David is, hopefully. You've been going to church for any length of time. He's the guy that slayed Goliath. He's the guy that stood up when no one else in all of Israel would stand up. And he fought against the biggest enemy that they had ever faced, with complete trust, with complete faith in God. He's the man who went from a little shepherd boy and became the servant of the king, and eventually was on the run, but then he exalted to be the king of Israel. And he became the greatest king that Israel had ever seen, that the world had ever seen. And here he is saying, "Who am I?" Well, I mean, we might say, well, you're David. You know who you are. You are the man. You are the one everybody looks up to. And if we were there in that day, I'm sure there were plenty of people who idolized David in his greatness and all that he had accomplished in his life. And here he is in his prayer saying, "God, you are wonderful. You give everything. And who am I? And who are your people?" Now, the people of Israel, the greatest nation in the world. But then he says that we could make this offering to you. Now, wait a second. What's this talking about? In order to understand what he's saying here, you have to understand the first 9 verses. We kind of skipped those. Understanding the context is usually a good thing. In the first 9 verses, we see David coming before an entire assembly of people as he's nearing the end of his life and saying, "I have provided everything that is needed for the temple, all of the gold for the instruments, the silver, the iron, the bronze, the beautiful stones. I provided all of that for the temple to be built." And he says, on top of that, I have provided 3,000 talents of gold. 3,000 talents of gold. 7,000 talents of silver. Now, talents, you're just sitting there like, what is that? Well, talent is understood to be a measurement of about 75 pounds, okay? It would be equivalent to about 10 years' wages of an individual, 1 talent. And David is offering 7,000 talents of gold. In our day, 5.5 billion, okay? It's a considerable amount of his wealth, if not all of his wealth. He's just setting it down before God and giving it so that the temple can be built by Solomon after him. And he just lays that down before God in front of this whole assembly. And then afterward he asks, who then will offer willingly consecrating himself today to the Lord, and all the people start offering as well. And they give even more than $5.5 billion in gold and silver and all kinds of precious metals and stones. And they're just all offering everything to God. And then David stands up and offers this prayer. Now think about how interesting it is that he starts off with a prayer saying, "You're the one who gives us riches and honor and strength. You're the one who gives us all these abilities." But then in this last section, he brings it even further, saying, "Who am I and who are we that we could even offer this?" You know how many people in our day feel as though what they have, they deserve? Have you ever had that feeling in yourself? Do you struggle with that feeling? I deserve this. I've earned this. You ever said that to your wife to justify buying something that maybe you shouldn't be buying? I earned it. Look at how hard I worked, baby. Said that plenty of times. So here is David saying, who am I that I could even offer this? All of this that I have isn't mine. It didn't come from me and my strength. He says, it all came from you, and it is your own. David's emptying his storehouses at the feet of God and saying, this is all yours. Why do I have it? It doesn't make any sense for me to have this stuff. It belongs to you. I'm just going to give it back to you. Is that not amazing? In his prayer, he comes to this recognition as he's offering up all these things that they're not really his anyways. But the prayer would be awesome if that was it. But, of course, there's more. Verse 17, he says, I know, my God, that you test the heart and have pleasure in uprightness. In the uprightness of my heart, I have freely offered all these things, and now I have seen your people who are present here offering freely and joyously to you. O Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, our fathers, keep forever such purposes and thoughts in the hearts of your people, and direct their hearts toward you. Notice as David is speaking on behalf of all of these people, he recognizes that God is able to test the hearts of the people. He says, you are the one who tests the hearts. As they're giving all of these things, they could be giving with the wrong motives, couldn't they? David could be laying all this before God in front of everybody to say, hey, I'm such a good servant of the Lord. Aren't you impressed with my sacrifices and my abilities? If that was the root of all of his giving would be fruitless. 1 Corinthians 13 kind of points that out. If I give everything to God and I'm not really doing it out of love for God, then it profits me nothing. And David, he has a love for God as he gives all these things. He's not doing it with the wrong intentions or the wrong heart because he knows God knows his heart. That it would be completely useless for him to offer all this money to God, all the while hoping to seek some benefit from the people around him. That's useless. And he desires to give this to God because he loves God. And not only that, he kind of looks at the people and he says, look at all these people as well. They're also just freely giving to you joyously. Because they love you. They've got the right hearts. They've got the right intentions as well. We all together with one accord just want to worship you, God, because of who you are. And the fact that you've given us all of these wonderful blessings in our life. But notice also that David doesn't assume that these hearts will be right forever. Look at verse 18 again. He says, O Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, our fathers. He's pointing back to all the promises God has made to bless Israel and to bless his people. And he's calling for God to do something. He says, keep forever such purposes and thoughts in the hearts of your people, and direct their hearts to you. You see this in David's prayer. He desires for the hearts that are so good and right and joyful about all the blessings that God has given, and so generously giving them back to God, he recognizes that they may become weak again. It's as though at this time, at this moment, their hearts are awakened to the truth of how wonderful God is and how worthy he is of all this devotion and sacrifice. But time will tell whether they're going to be able to endure the temptations that Satan's going to throw at them. And so he doesn't say to all the people, you guys better stay like this forever. He asks God, keep them this way. Work in their lives. Direct their hearts always to you. Do you see David's purpose in offering up this prayer? It's this beautiful idea, this beautiful concept is inside of him in his prayer that makes this great. And this is a concept, an idea that we need in our prayers as well. It's this idea that God can do anything. God can do anything. This is an extreme level of faith that David has in God, believing he is the one responsible for all the good things that David enjoys in life and that all these people enjoy, and that he can provide for them. Even if they gave it all up, he can provide more. But the thing that he wants God to do most, that he believes he can do, is affect the heart of his people and make them good. Help them to have a good heart. David knows this is the most important thing. Say this to my kids all the time. Said it in VBS over and over again. Their number one rule is obey mommy and daddy, and the most important thing is to have a good heart. And David is trying to help his people develop a good heart. And he's calling for God to influence them and to help them to have a good heart. He said, after he had offered all this, back in verse 5, who then will offer willingly, consecrating himself today to the Lord? I don't know how much we talk about consecrating, but I'd like for us to take a few moments to think about this word a little bit. We don't use it very much. I don't think we've talked about it in our house at all. My kids probably have no clue what this word is. To consecrate something is to make it holy, to set it apart, and to make it different from everything else. And what David is calling for the people to do is to offer this willingly and set themselves apart as different from everyone else in the world. That they would be a people who are purely belonging to God. That they would be a people completely devoting themselves to God, unlike anyone else on the earth. And he's calling for them to consecrate themselves to the Lord as he is consecrating himself to the Lord. That's his explanation of what he's doing. By laying all of his wealth down at the feet of God, he is saying, God, I am yours. I am devoted to you. I am all yours. I'm all in. I don't belong to anybody else or anything else. This money doesn't own me. You own me. And he says, who else wants to have that kind of heart and that kind of relationship with God? And tons of people say yes. And what David wants is for everyone to have that heart forever. Now let's talk about ourselves a little bit. You see in his prayer that desire. Now let's talk about ourselves a little bit. Why would we ever do something like that? Why would we ever consecrate ourselves to God? I mean, to concentrate, to devote everything to God. Why would we ever want to do that? Well, first of all, let's think about what that would look like. Okay? What would it look like? Just imagine in your mind. What would it look like if I were to consecrate myself to God? How would I handle my money? What would I spend money on? What would I not spend money on? How would I budget? How would I use my other resources? How would I use my time? How would I use my possessions? If I'm consecrated, if I'm devoting myself to God, how would I use those blessings that I recognize have come to me from God and they belong to Him? How would I use them? How would I develop my character? How would I develop my relationships with people who are around me? How would I nurture those and cultivate those different relationships? And would I be trying to glorify God in using the abilities that God gave me? Of course I would. If I was consecrating myself to God, if I was saying, I belong to God, then all of the abilities and all of the riches and all of the possessions and all of the relationships and all of the time that I have on this earth would belong to God. And that sounds a little bit scary, doesn't it? I mean, why would we not want to do that? Well, we've got a lot of things that we like for ourselves. That level of devotion is not a very easy thing for us to accept. And here yet we see David at the end of his life, having succeeded in so many ways, having accumulated so much stuff, having so many opportunities before him to pursue internal fulfillment in stuff, in himself. And he says, this isn't what's valuable. He's what's valuable. Why is he willing to consecrate himself? Why are they all willing to consecrate themselves? Well, it's in the prayer. He recognizes who God is. And he recognizes what God's done for him. We have to be thinking about that. If we're failing to remember who God is, we're failing to know who God is, because the world is distracting us and just deluding us with all kinds of other things, we won't consecrate ourselves. We won't devote ourselves to God. He will fall down the list of importance very quickly. And also we see that we need to recognize who we are. David says, who am I and who are we that we should be able to offer this? We need to understand, we're nobodies from nowhere. We don't deserve a relationship with God. We don't deserve all the blessings He showered upon us, and yet He wants to give them to us. And so understanding who He is only really helps us as we also understand who we are and how unworthy we are of entering into His presence and enjoying all the blessings that He wants to shower upon us. And once those two things are in us, then we have to develop and cultivate a love and a trust for God that's greater than our love and trust in ourselves. I won't devote myself to God if I'm continually seeking the exaltation of myself. I love David. I love the picture of David. You think about him, he's this shepherd boy who stepped up when no one else would. And I imagine that was a hard thing for him to do. I imagine that as he became king, he longed for the days when he was just a shepherd boy and just tending sheep. Imagine it was extremely difficult to be the king of a nation, to maintain the righteousness and the goodness and the example, to lead other people who were just evil in all different kinds of ways. Imagine that was a painful thing. Why would he do that? Well, this is why. Because he had devoted himself to God a long time ago. And this accumulation of stuff that he had over time, he was just going to just lay it all at God's feet. He had planned that, and he did it in such a way that all the people were inspired by him to do the same thing. I love this story. I love this little prayer at the end of the book of 1 Chronicles. It just blows my mind. But what really makes this amazing is when we come into the New Testament and we think about our David. Why would we consecrate ourselves to God? Well, maybe the best answer is Jesus. He's worthy of our devotion. He's worthy of our sacrifice and giving everything because of Jesus. And it's fascinating how Jesus is this character that was typologically represented by David. What David did a lot of times represents what Jesus does. And as we see Jesus come onto the scene, we see him giving up heaven. He gave up all the riches of eternity with God in order to come and to show us what it means to consecrate yourself to God. Whenever he was on this earth, he didn't live a glamorous and life full of wealth and popularity and seeking all those things. He didn't accept any of that. Instead, he just pursued serving God with everything he had, to the point of even laying his own life down for God. That's the level of devotion that he demonstrated for us. And you know, Jesus actually asked the same question that David asked in a different way. David said, "Who will offer willingly to the Lord?" Based on all these wonderful truths about who he is. Well, Jesus asked it in his own way. He says, "Who will take up his cross and follow me?" Who will lay up treasures in heaven and not on earth? Who's going to live for God? So as we think about the idea of this prayer, and we think about what great prayers are, let's remember the heart is the most important thing. And as David was sitting there praying for God to give them a new heart, a good heart that would last forever, we see Jesus come in and he provides the means for a new heart to be created inside of us. He's the reason that we give. He's the reason that we are willing to devote our lives to him, to God. He's everything. In receiving his sacrifice, we receive opportunity to enter into the presence of God for all time and to receive every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places. That's made available to you and me. Who are we to deserve that? We don't deserve that. And that is supposed to change our hearts to where we stop thinking about ourselves and we start thinking more about what God would want us to do and how God would want us to live. Is that your story? Is that what you're doing right now in life? I know it's difficult, but that's what we're all called to. His grace is freely offered to each and every one of us, but it cost him his life. He was willing to give that up to serve you so that you could see it's worth it. It's worth it. And if you're not willing to give your life to God, if you're going to deny Christ, if you're going to just say no to the invitation to enjoy every spiritual blessing, then not only are you not worthy of it, but you will not receive it. And so we all must make that decision. We all must consecrate ourselves and devote ourselves to God. And if you've not done that, we want to encourage you to do that. Joyously, freely, not out of guilt and shame, but because you recognize how wonderful God is and what he's done for you. And if you need to do that today, will you please come as we stand and as we sing.